is a lawyer, writer, and 21st century visionary. He is an emerging figure in the disclosure movement who is leading a campaign to lobby the United States government to disclose such controversial truths as the fact that Mars harbors life and that the United States has achieved quantum access to past and future events. That is amazing, and I'll tell you, I know that some of you get on the fence about Andrew and his story. However, all I could say is there's no doubt in my mind that he believes every word he's saying, and he doesn't miss a beat. So, I'm not really quick to doubt what he says. Laura Magdalene Eisenhower is also joining us tonight. She is the great-granddaughter of former President Eisenhower. Laura is an intuitive astrologist, global alchemist, cosmic mythologist, and is, again, the great-granddaughter of Dwight David Eisenhower. She is on a profound mission to reveal our true origins. That's what we all want. She is also a whistleblower and has been speaking out about being recruited to go to a colony on Mars that represented a timeline that she refused to go along with. She has been able to uncover some necessary truths and agendas, and humanity is being kept in the dark about it all. Ben Davis, well, he's been a guest on Late Night in the Midlands before, just as all of our guests tonight have. His first show was on October 18th of 2013. Disclosing his UFO abduction on March 14th, 1976, and the subsequent alien incident at Fort Polk, the disclosure there. Ben Davis went public for the first time on November 30th of 2011 on the Kevin Smith Show after being contacted about a witness of another UFO story. CSM James Norton, he has here, that was previously broadcast on KSS and having died under very strange and sudden health issues. Something troubling about Ben Davis with me, and that is, well, something he said. And that is that when he first made contact with me about coming on Late Night in the Midlands, he had told me that the previous couple interviewers had suffered heart attacks, had died. And, it wasn't long after I had one. So kind of strange, but I'm still here. I'm still kicking, thank God. All right, so there's the bios, and now we're going to get to it here. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to add them all into a one call here, and so bear with me for a moment. So let's first bring on Ben Davis. Let's also bring on Andrew Bishago. Oh, wait, no, that's not going to work. Not like that. All right, so we got you here, Ben.
Yeah, we do.
Well, welcome aboard. And now, let's bring in Laura Eisenhower and add her to the group. Andrew, is that you? You with us?
Yes. Good evening, Michael. It's great to be back on with you.
Well, good evening. It's great to have you back. We also have Laura Eisenhower here as well. Hello to all three of you.
Hello, great to be here.
Oh, it's great to have you.
Same here.
Ben, I guess we'll start off with you because you actually made this all happen here for tonight. So let's start with you. Where would you like to start this thing out?
Let me give you a little background here.
Okay.
I don't know if Laura or Andrew has listened in on my previous shows with Kevin Smith or even you, but I come from a very highly recognized political family in Florida. My great uncle, president of the Florida Senate in 1955, whose father, president of the Florida Senate in 1915, whose brother was the Chief Justice in the Supreme Court of Florida, sat there for 8 years. And no other state in the country has had a combination of father and son being presidents. Having said that, during my early years in high school, my father, he decided to campaign for Lawton Childs, and they used to call him Walking Lawton. And he got elected along with Askew Adams' campaign. I mean, Florida's definitely a Republican state, and it was unheard of. Well, he did that by campaigning the rural North Florida farmer counties from like Jacksonville to like Mariana. And it was like the Jesse Ventura, how did you get elected governor kind of thing, you know? And this is where the issue goes. During my UFO incident and subsequent disclosure shows with Kevin Smith and what you just said about the heart attack issue. You had a heart attack, I think it was the day after I had an attack myself. I had a 195 heart rate for an hour and 13 minutes.
Well, I got above that, man. I was over 200.
Well, yeah, well, I mean, anything over 1 beat a second is, you know, out of control.
Yeah.
So it was over the show that you had earlier in the week, you know, and you know me, I work on the road so much that I can't get online a lot. I don't have the time and whatnot. But it was about the super magnets, the therapy for the Morgellons. And so I decided to, well, I'm going to experiment myself. I'm not going to buy this guy's stuff, you know, and I went and bought some super magnets. I put them around my wrist and my ankles, all four extremities, not just the wrist. And after about 20 minutes, my wife gets home. I said, let's go to the flea market. And just as I was getting to the flea market, that's when the heart rate started. My wife was flipping out. She works in a hospital. She is a dietitian. And she's heard some of my history. I mean, we've only been married 8 years, and she's unaware totally. I mean, she knows nothing about what I've been doing my whole life, trying to survive in a timeline that I made a choice from my UFO incident. So where this is going is, I believe that I could never really explain, like in the earlier shows, where I was going until I was revealed this final task that I was handed to do. And that's the red pill I chose back during the Army incident in 1976. Well, I had believed all these years that, and this is what's very common now, especially with Laura and her, you know, new awakening, and how it's connected with Andrew in the time travel program. I mean, my whole life for 39 years, I've been kidding people in a way, you know, with my stories and trying not to talk too much about it, but I could never explain certain things almost on a daily basis. You know, like how did my big lighter change color? And I didn't have 2 or 3 of them in my pocket like some, you know, sleight of hand kind of trick. I'm not into that. And and then when I ran across, somebody kind of like steered me to the Pegasus Project, and I talked about it almost a year ago on your show. I think it was September 2nd or something like that. I couldn't even pronounce Andrew's last name. We were laughing about that. And then when I ran across Laura, April 21st, on the last time she was here, that sensation came over me, and I recognized both of them together. And so what got me to this point was a document I found online through the Black Vault, which was the Freedom of Information Act documentations on a book published by V. Valerian, the guy that wrote the Matrix documents. I mean, this is way back in the Reagan years. And the research in that's taken me 15 years to figure it all out, but I couldn't really get it together because the internet hasn't become such value to the public. And so that's where all the dots started connecting together. And so now here's my final night, and I got to go back to work tomorrow morning. And thank God we're not getting any eruptions anymore. But yeah, it's kind of a thing where my doctor had told me from those heartbeat rate, the next time you have that, Ben, you need to go to the ER right away. Well, I don't trust doctors, for anything. And so, having said that, here we are tonight with all the issues that you love to have about trust, truth, and all the troubles that are profoundly increasing across the world, and you can't put a finger on it. Well, I'm here to say this. There are aliens and these fabrications of the consciousness, and then the density levels, which is also called the reality hoax, has all been put together by our own government and the elites, like you said, not only for decades, but for centuries, to keep us prisoners of our own demise. In other words, we're slaves financially in this timeline. So the part where Andrew comes in with the Pegasus project and time jumping or whatever in the Mars programs opened up my suppressed memories from what I thought was an alien, abduction. And I still haven't really convinced myself whether that actually occurred or was it a PSYOP program, with the military. And if they really do have aliens that are physical and in the consciousness, like the 5th, 6th, or 7th and above now density levels, then this consciousness awareness is exactly the key that Laura is trying to express and get out there. And what Andy has said, he's the president of the United States. Well, guess what? That suppressed memories that came to me is I was sent back in time because I was on another timeline in that program. I'm believing or not, but I'm going to say this, Mr. President, thank you for sending me back. And that's where I'm at.
Andrew?
Well, Ben's account is very interesting. I began my truth campaign in 2004 with a lecture to 40 friends in Portland, Oregon, where I am tonight. I'm actually across the mighty Columbia in Vancouver, Washington, my home base, again, after 6 months in North Carolina. I would say that in the last decade since I began my truth campaign, not intending to run for president ultimately, simply to get the truth out to the public about time travel and the fact that over 40 years ago we achieved it, and about 35 years ago we started putting U.S. personnel on Mars. I've had about 100 individuals approach me, mostly through emails, with similar accounts about how they recognized me as somebody who was going to come forward publicly and make these revelations. There have been a number of psychics who have contacted me affirming the fact that they see me being elected either in 2016 or in the next election cycle in 2020. We've had the statement that the Australian psychic Shannon, who uses the trade name Mortis the Wizard, utilizing a spirit comm, actually, when he asked those on the other side for the name of the next president, about 10 seconds later, my very unusual name came forward, Andrew Bashago, and then about 20 seconds after that, another spirit said Daniel, which in fact is my middle name. So we've had the spirit comm affirm it. We've had psychics contact me. I've been contacted by 3 or 4 people who have either themselves woken up in bed or woken up next to their spouse and had their spouse say, this is going to sound crazy, but I just saw the next president of the United States. His name he's a maverick outsider named Andrew Bashago. I think that's the name, something like that. It's a Slavic name, whatever. In other words, people who have never heard me on radio or see me on television have actually affirmed the same prediction. The bottom line is this, and that is that somehow as a result of being involved in time travel in the late 1960s and early 1970s as a child, I became deeply embedded somehow in the quantum hologram. I mean, the evidence of this is in all, for example, all the quantum synchronicities that relate to my time travels that have come through, even through the descendants of some of the people I interacted with when I was time traveling as a child. I'm talking about displacements of 100 years or more, where somebody who's played a critical role in my life is the descendant of somebody I interacted with when I was time traveling. So I'm delighted that Ben has come forward so courageously and shared this account, because it shows that we're on the positive timeline. And I say that not to be self-aggrandizing, but simply to say this. We're going to be moving to a society that is going to be teleporting. We're going to dispense with the internal combustion engine, which Vice President Gore was correct in identifying as the chief threat to our atmosphere and the chief cause of climate change. If we adopt Tesla teleportation, we will eliminate 60% of greenhouse gases from the atmosphere that human beings contribute. And again, I don't mean to be self-aggrandizing, but there's one individual, there's one presidential candidate who has made it his business for over 10 years now to make this argument. And I'm that individual. The year 2045 that I visited when I was a child in Project Pegasus was a society where planes, trains, trucks, cars, motorcycles had been eliminated, and teleports were as commonplace as elevator landings are in contemporary society. So that's only 30 years out. I say that's the positive timeline, because if we can get rid of that threat from climate change, we can stabilize global climate, we will have moved beyond the risk that the CIA has been so concerned about for the last 45 years. Andrew Marshall's study for the Pentagon, which indicated that if we move to a new high level of climate change, that is temperature-wise, we'll essentially see this scenario that Art Bell and Whitley Strieber described in their book, The Coming Global Superstorm, which is that the polar ice caps will melt, they will make the oceans less saline, more freshwater. That will defeat the Gulf Stream, and we'll no longer have warm equatorial waters going up to the North and South Pole, and we could be pitched into a new ice age as a result, in the same way that, let's say, your refrigerator overheats and then overfreezes on a hot July afternoon. So I'm always delighted when I hear these stories, because they keep me in the race. I haven't officially declared yet. I'm going to be declaring in the fall. I'm now working on compliance, the FEC filings. I'm preparing my FEC filings, and I'm maintaining a vital discussion about what I would try to accomplish as president at Andy 2016 ! On Facebook. But there's been a lot of this. So somehow my ultimate presidency is deeply embedded in the quantum hologram, and people who are either very intuitive, even the professional psychics that have contacted me. There have been supporters of mine who have had psychic readings utilizing the Tarot deck, where one psychic in Los Angeles asked Gato Mercado why he wasn't working on a political campaign, or was he considering working on a presidential campaign, which he is, as one of my supporters in LA. And then he said, "Who is Andrew?" Okay, so we've had a lot of these incidents, and I think I'm certainly edified and fortified when I hear them, but I think, again, we can relax and enjoy these accounts, because they indicate that, as I love to say in my public talks, Tesla wins. The future that we and our children and grandchildren are going to be inhabiting is going to be the advanced technical society that began in Nikola Tesla's imagination. And that's why I'm running for president, and that's the world that we're going to bring about. So I view Ben's statement as very hopeful, and I certainly extend my thanks to him for bringing it forward.
And I hope he's right. And I would say this: anybody who becomes the next president has a whole lot of work ahead of them. I'll tell you that.
That's for sure.
Yeah, and if you don't go along, wear the vest. I want you on future shows, Andrew. So take care of yourself if you do get it.
Yeah, we're making preparations for that, for not being compromised by fear or intimidation, and being safe from any physical threats that might be directed at me. I've been moving essentially from safe house to safe house for 10 years now, so
I've been doing it for 39.
It is kind of scary. It's a little bit scary before the Secret Service protection kicks in, but I'm going to stay in the race, and I'm not going to live my life to save it. I'm going to live my life to live it, and this is what I want to do with my life. So I'm going to be running, come hell or high water, and I'm not going to give in to fear or intimidation.
That's the way to be. And now, as far as your the jumping, the time travel, and the going to Mars, Laura, you were also approached, and you were asked to join that project. Is that right?
Yes. It's a little bit different. It wasn't about the teleportation so much. The way that we were going to get there was on something called an ARC, spelled A-R-C, and the target date was 2012, and it was to be a permanent colonist. And when I met Andrew, we started to connect the dots, and some of the information that he heard when he was in Project Pegasus, he shared with me, and then I shared my stuff with him about the group, the recruiters, and some of the names that we shared were a very strong link, like Ed Dames, right, Andy?
Yeah, actually, I should note, and out of the deep friendship and respect that I have for Laura, I first heard the name Laura Eisenhower in 1972, a year before her birth, as my vice presidential running mate. And I don't think either of us is prepared to make a statement now, but we are still on a timeline where Laura and I are both profound friends and deep political allies, and so we have both been persons of interest in the sense that DARPA, on behalf of the U.S. intelligence community and military, identified us as leaders in the truth movement when I was a small child and Laura wasn't even born yet. And so I think we would be remiss in light of Ben's opening statement not to reference that fact. Specifically, it was just a casual meeting in a church that we had shot in Albuquerque that my father, his longtime personal friend Connie Chavez of Old Town Albuquerque, and several of the project engineers on Project Pegasus sought refuge during a deluge. Curiously, it's a sort of a biblical metaphor there. And there was a discussion of my presidential activities in the future, and Laura was referenced as my vice presidential running mate. So I don't want to take that further because Laura and I haven't firmed anything up, but I'm simply saying that this is what the U.S. government began to be involved in when it achieved quantum access. I define quantum access in a larger sense than time travel because it includes not just physical time travel of human beings, but also doing things like propagating holograms in which a past or future event can simply be studied at sort of on a level of technical remote viewing. So the import here is that we were identified as leaders in our generation, as political allies relative to the presidency and vice presidency, and as leaders in the truth movement relative to the project itself, and then the whole question of the secret initiative involving the settlement of human beings on Mars. So Laura, I think it's fair to say, together with our co-mentor Alfred Weber, we know we've been playing a very dangerous game here in the sense pardon me, that we became involved in something very controversial that was so unbelievable that, in a sense, we had some protection from the fact that the government could point to what we were saying and make fun of it. And that's, in fact, what President Obama did after Laura and my fellow chrononaut William Stillings appeared on Coast to Coast AM on November 10th of 2011. The president actually ridiculed our claim that he had been one of our colleagues in the project. But I stood by the corroborating testimony of William Stillings, of Bernard Mendez, and then Laura, making the highly unusual and admirable decision as the member of a presidential family to come forward and speak about a public policy issue of great controversiality, which I'm deeply grateful for. But make no mistake, these disclosures were so sensitive and went to the heart of what the U.S. government has secretly been involved in for the last 40 years, that they were important enough for example, Laura to be identified as a political person of interest before her birth. And so that's essentially what links us. And in a similar way, Alfred's name was revealed to me because when they were time-traveling books that I would write or edit in the future back to the present, they time traveled Alfred's seminal work on exopolitics, entitled Exopolitics. And I was literally in the presence of that book that I would book design and edit for Alfred in 2005 at a lunch, again in Old Town Albuquerque, where the personnel from Project Pegasus would dine, in 1971. So there's been sort of an interpolation of the careers of some of us in the covert time travel activities of the government, and they do implicate very sensitive matters. Who will be president? Who will be vice president? How will these people reach public office? What will they be? What public policy initiatives will they be calling for when they run? And Michael, you may recall that I discussed how during several lunches during the early 70s, both Presidents Bush in one luncheon and then Bill Clinton at another lunch were present, and their presidencies were openly discussed. I also remember a small lunch in Albuquerque involving Vice President Cheney. So a lot of this came about as a result of them utilizing quantum access to study an issue of great importance to survival and peace in an atomic age, which is who is going to be president, who is going to be vice president, what do we know about these individuals, and can they be trusted with the presidency, which obviously brings with it access to the nuclear launch codes. So this is one aspect of the future that Project Pegasus was focusing on, and I would be less than truthful if I didn't reveal the fact that Laura and I were found to be on their radar screen as future political actors.
I see. Well, this is interesting, and we got to hold for a moment. We've got to take a break because, all right, let's get back to it. Andrew Basiago, Laura Eisenhower, Ben Davis, they are my guests, and I'm guessing we should be all right. I think the power of prayer will prevail, I hope, and all will be good. So, yeah, let's get back to it here with my guest. And so, all right, so everybody, we are back, and all right, I'm hearing a feedback. Okay, there we go. All right, so we're back, and you're talking about a timeline, where we actually would be underwater, and I'm a little bit interested in that. But there are some questions from the chat. And what I want to ask everybody to do, if you have questions, private message those to me. Please, and then I'll get to them as quick as I can, or you can call in at 803-317-2264, but give us a little bit. So, Andrew, I had to cut you off for the break, and you're more than welcome to pick right back up if you like.
Well, if Ben saw Laura and I serving as president and vice president, for example, or just as prominent figures in the truth movement, I view that as very hopeful, because it indicates that we're on the positive timeline where we're not going to see, for example, a global coastal flooding event. Now, I had seen such a future during a chronovisor probe that was launched from ITT Defense Communications in Nutley, New Jersey on November 5th of 1971. I saw specifically the U.S. Supreme Court building under 100 feet of brackish water in the year 2013. Here we are in 2015, and that event has not happened. Well, what happened in 2012 is that there was a solar flare that if the Earth had been progressed 1 degree of rotation, about 5 to 6 days in its annual rotation around the sun, we would have had a melting of the polar ice cap. So that catastrophic timeline is not the timeline that we're on. And that's why I don't think we should relent in defeatism. I think we should get intelligent, good, kind people into leadership. I was recently asked, who do you admire? Who do you think's exhibiting true leadership in the world? And I said the Dalai Lama. And the questioner asked me, why the Dalai Lama? And I said, because his religion is kindness. I'm confident that if we get loving, kind, intelligent people in government, that we can create a remarkable civilization. We have all the tools available to us. We just have to make certain course corrections in our evolution as a civilization. But we are not, the evidence is beginning to show that we are not on a catastrophic timeline. That horrible future in which, for example, 70% of humanity would have drowned if there was a global coastal flooding event, because that's the percentage of global population that lives within a 1-hour automobile ride of an ocean. Okay, so that catastrophic future that we saw during one of the probes that I was personally and substantially involved in, we were actually wearing time-space suits that were sputter-coated with titanium. We had something like a deep diving helmet on. We had a respiratory device, a communications device in that particular uniform, if you will, or apparel. But we didn't see that occur before 2013, and so we can extrapolate and say, well, if we can correct the climate crisis, we don't have to see that future. We can't control what the sun does, but we can control what we do. And what we can do is what Vice President Gore called for in Earth in the Balance, a work that I actually think had a visionary component to it. We can eliminate the internal combustion engine. We can stop putting carbon in the global atmosphere. We have the technology. There's been a cover-up of Nikola Tesla's technology since the War Department seized his paperwork upon his death on January 7th of 1943. That's when the time travel and the Tesla energy cover-up began. His papers were never lost. They're sitting at the Los Alamos National Laboratories. I know that because my late father had access to them, because my dad was asked by the U.S. government to recapitulate Tesla's teleportation experiments when he, my father, was working at the Thomas A. Edison Research Laboratory in West Orange, New Jersey, between 1956 and 64. And in that capacity, he became one of the government's experts on the theory and practice of Tesla teleportation. I myself first teleported between New Jersey and New Mexico at age 6 in the winter of 1968. So we're talking about a cover-up here that's over 40 years old. You know, I like to say that when Al Gore, you know, before he got on the bandwagon regarding climate change, indeed when Al Gore was an undergraduate at Harvard, first studying climate change in Dr. Roger Revell's greenhouse seminar, the United States government had secretly developed the technology to eliminate 60% of those greenhouse gases from that we contribute, that human society contributes to the global atmosphere. So there's been a lag here where public policy hasn't tracked the secret development of technology by the defense community. Key technologies have been weaponized that should have been generalized and put in practice under United States leadership throughout the entire world. That's what I hope to achieve as president. One of my major goals, and I've stated this clearly, is going to be global public teleportation. We'll find a way to make it safe physiologically, to place it in different countries of the world in a way that there'll be a turnkey way to shut the system down if a particular country tries to use it to launch a military assault. I believe that the United States creating such a grid, creating such a network of teleports will make us safer from surprise attack. You know, the legislative mandate of DARPA was to prevent military surprise, but in weaponizing and making secret Tesla teleportation, the military itself, the defense technical community itself, prevented us from creating the network of teleports that will make us safer in the sense that we could deploy personnel from different locations on the planet in the event that any aggressive nation or rogue faction of a government or criminal or terrorist group would try to launch teleportation on the world by surprise. So the analogy there would be the fact that, you know, the New York City Police Department is safer the more taxis that are on the street, because they can commandeer any taxi to pursue, for example, fleeing felons. So I'm actually still serving on Project Pegasus in the sense that I'm trying to bring about public adoption of this technology because it will prevent military surprise.
Nice.
And so we need to do this to protect our country, but we also need to do it to safeguard the planet from environmental catastrophe. And that's why I view it as my duty to come forward, to have come forward as a truth teller to bring that message to the people of our country and of the world.
Fantastic. Now, we have a question from our chat room, and he asked me to ask you, Andy, about the secret space program, about how real it is, and obviously I think you can say it's real. He said Solar Warden and the breakaway civilization, if you could comment on that, and how far have they traveled outside the solar system?
Well, I don't know who originated the concept. I think the breakaway civilization has been very articulately described by one of our more intelligent ufologists, namely Richard Dolan. And I think Richie's point is that if critical technologies remain secret, what will happen is a kind of a priesthood or inner party of government insiders will be utilizing advanced technology, exploring the solar system and beyond, and keeping humanity at large, indeed most of the population of even the developed countries, out of those activities. It's my position that that has happened. Now, what evidence do we have? Well, in the broad picture, we have the statement made by Ben Rich, the former CEO of Lockheed Skunk Works, one of the two major defense contractors that gave the United States government its Mars jump room technology in a joint venture with my father's employer, namely the Ralph M. Parsons Company of Pasadena, California. Ben Rich stated a few years before his death several years ago that anything you imagine that we could do technically, we've already achieved. And this is a direct quote. We now have the technology to take ET home. Now, if we add to that the fact that now 7 individuals have come forward giving mutually corroborating testimony of a very specific and detailed nature about the secret U.S. presence, and now internationally, even perhaps intergalactic presence on Mars. And that kind of statement, the Project Serpo story, would be within the ambit of what Ben Rich described. The notion that we actually have sent a team of explorers to live as guests on a planet outside our solar system, in fact, in deep space. I'm not surprised, and I give high credence to accounts like the Solar Warden story, because the evidence is right on the table at this point that a secret space program emerged in tandem with the overt space program. The astronauts were featured in the science reporting on television and in magazines and movies openly and overtly. But then a secret cadre of U.S. chrononauts was created. I happen to be in the second category. And our activities in time-space exploration and in teleporting, for example, at least to one other planet in our solar system, namely the planet Mars, was carried out. And our story was not told. We were not lionized. We weren't even given a name. That's why I'm trying to popularize the name chrononaut to indicate a time-space traveler as distinguished from just a traveler, a conventional traveler among the stars. I think that the breakaway civilization that Richard Dolan has described has already occurred, and let me just cite one fact that I think indicates that.
Sure.
And that is that in 2008 and in 2012, the largest group of voters in the history of the United States presidency elected Barack Obama their president, and there was no public discussion, no revelation by the Obama administration or initially his campaign team, and deceptive statements made by the president himself that he had been one of the young adult participants in the Mars jump room program. Now, how do I know that? I know that because Barack Obama, then using the name Barry Soetoro, was one of my fellow trainees at College of the Siskiyous in Weed, California, in the summer of 1980, when we took part in a 3.5-week seminar under Major Ed Dames. That the presence of Barack Obama and myself in that training program has been corroborated by 2 other participants, William Stillings and Bernard Mendez. Together, the 3 of us have identified 17 people who served or had personal knowledge of the Mars jump room program when we were jumping to Mars. I sat next to Barry, as we called the president, in class. For several weeks, we roomed together at the dorms at College of the Siskiyous. We were sequestered there for several months that summer, working on a threat assessment regarding the Martian humanoid civilization that the CIA asked for a thesis from Barry, myself, and Regina Dugan as to whether or not the Martian humanoid civilization presented a threat to our civilization on Earth. I sometimes saw him around Los Angeles during the early 80s. He was sometimes present at the jump room facility at 999 North Sepulveda Boulevard. I sometimes was in the jump room going to Mars with him. And on several occasions, I was either in a relatively large group of people who had jumped together or in a team of 3 headed by Bernard Mendez, in which Barry Obama and I carried out exploratory activities on the planet Mars or whatever environment off-planet they were sending us to if they were mistaken about it being Mars. So the President of the United States, twice elected, with the largest popular vote in the history of the greatest republic in the history of our planet, is a secret space program insider. He has not revealed it. There's been no intelligent discourse shared with the rest of civilization about his involvement. And the Washington Press Corps has been entirely asleep at the switch about this very provocative and meaningful story about the president's past. They've been more concerned about whether he was born in Kenya or Indonesia rather than Hawaii than in the fact that he served in the secret space program. I will say that to the end of my days simply because it's the truth. I'm running for president after waging a 10-year truth campaign about the secret defense projects I was involved in. The president has been given a pass. He has served for 8 years now, almost 8 years, 6.5 years, and not revealed that he was one of America's early chrononauts. He served bravely and well. He should be proud of our service. He never should have betrayed his comrades by mocking our claims. You know, I'm a great admirer of the active, positive presidents that we've seen, like Laura's great-grandfather, Dwight David Eisenhower, John F. Kennedy, and I would even add perhaps Ronald Reagan to that group. And I think it's lamentable that the president mocked his comrades in regard to the new dangerous and experimental activities off-planet that we were involved in together. I can't see, for example, John Fitzgerald Kennedy mocking his shipmates on the PT-109, or, you know, O'Brien, the fellow sailor that he saved by clenching a strap from his life preserver in his teeth and straining his back. I can't see, for example, President Eisenhower mocking any of the men who served under him during World War II, or Ronald Reagan mocking any of the 77 people that he saved when he was a lifeguard those summers back growing up in Illinois. But here we have a president who literally mocked his comrades when we came forward in 2011. And that has done nothing but fueled my passion to tell the truth about this concealed aspect of presidential history that may have implicated not just one president, Barack Obama, but if we are indeed on the timeline in which I also reached the White House, the young adult history of 2 U.S. presidents. The story will be told. I'm telling it. I have nothing but thanks and gratitude for the brave individuals like Laura who have come forward and supported my claims, because they too are a major part of this story. The government was developing.
Can I break in for a second?
Sure. Sorry.
Yeah. While you're on the subject about Barack Obama, and why I believe this task that was embedded in me for 39 years is to bring this out in the open, is the fact that the possibility on this timeline that Obama is inserted into this program for one purpose, because the elite, the corporations, shadow government, and all that have been compromised a long time ago. And I think your father had something to do with this because he was inside the Pentagon. And by saying this, it means by prepping it to the point where, even though it looks like he's all this and that he's not, believe it or not, it's probably the clue to where it turns this timeline into where it's supposed to be, because it's ticking off the entire population and the entire world to the point that what everybody's saying with this negativity is it's World War III, Planet X, asteroids, Jade Helm 15, all these bad things that are coming to head. Well, guess what? I believe this is why the people are going to get woken up tonight. because I'm saying this, that Obama is part of that plan. And the elite and the corporations and whatnots don't know this. And so where it's going to lead to is it's going to do a rapid change, kind of like what Laura has been, expressing so vehemently about. The mind has to wake up. What we got to stop doing is this. We got to stop watching television. We got to quit doing the Facebook thing and all the other YouTube things, because and this is what happened with Michael the other night, and why he's going with the membership thing, is they're stealing, and if it is run by NSA, as Snowden said, then it's all manipulated anyway. And where did they get that from? An ET civilization that does that. Mm-hmm. And so we are fighting that. And we just don't.
And I want to ask you, are you suggesting that the president has played a positive role by concealing his involvement in the secret space program?
Exactly.
In a kind of in a positive way?
Yes. It's a hidden agenda under the hidden agenda.
Well, let me say, to his credit, that through an intermediary to Bernard Mendez, our fellow Mars jumper, now this is double hearsay, so bear with me, but basically Bernard reported that he communicated with the president through an intermediary. So Bernie's not here to testify, and that intermediary isn't either, but what reached me third hand is that the president remembered the jump room program. He remembered me vividly, of course, because we interacted a lot as friends and colleagues on the project, indeed roomed together. And yet everything about the project was vague and dreamlike, and that was consistent with our memories because Ed Dames was using kind of the reverse-engineered American version of a Soviet LIDA machine, LIDA, to suppress our memories of the project and of our jumps right after we were debriefed after each jump, and then after when we were leaving the project. But that he wouldn't come forward as president, but he promised to come forward after leaving the White House. And now that he's constitutionally compelled to do so, and presumably he will surrender it's the presidency, if he knows what's good for him, we may have something quite dramatic occurring here, where he won't just be playing a passive role in furtherance of potentially of the truth, as you're suggesting, but he will actually come forward publicly and admit his involvement. And I think that would be a blessed event, and I think it would recast the whole discourse that's already occurred about Mars and the secret space program in general.
Right. Well, here's the clincher. This is not what the elites want to do. They want to start all this negativity, and all the suppositions from the Matrix documents, which to me was an implanted scenario theory and so on. I mean, some of the documents in this publication were taken from an article that I saw in it that was dated prior to the Law of One alleged recordings, which gave us this consciousness awareness, and we all are from one, source to begin with, universally. And it's been exponentially growing to the point where, sure, we're being suppressed psychologically.
And let's hear from Laura for a moment.
Yeah, about that.
Laura, what say you on all this? I'd love to hear your take as well.
Well, I just think this is the most critical time because, people have to understand when they vote for somebody into office that supports this sort of stuff, that it's a contract, that they're in agreement to it. That you can't just vote this in and then complain later and act surprised because the information is out there, and it's irresponsible to not look at the stories connected to Hillary Clinton and the dynasty of the Bush family and what that has represented. And this is what we're dealing with. We're dealing with, massive technologies. We understand that we're being sprayed. We understand that there's nanoparticles in the chemtrails. Artificial intelligence isn't a new concept for people. And the idea of HARP and weather control. And they're really getting close to having us completely weaponized. And it's not going to work on everybody because some of us can't be mind controlled, and that's where the timelines come in, and where the energetics that we carry and how we work with it, makes or breaks our ability to get on the right track. And I mean, it's really breathing down our neck, and I'm not saying that from a fear-based place, because this is a mission that's ingrained in me, and it's only about the positive timeline, and that's why, Andy and I were linked up, and that's why the three of us are here, because this is what we represent, and there is no other option. But people have to start getting really responsible about, what they're supporting in this world and what they're enabling. And this is an incredible opportunity, and this is the opportunity. This 2016 election is critical. And the thing is, with most of the votes being rigged and a lot of manipulations going on behind the scenes, the most important thing is to get that kind of information out there. Just like when we're trying to figure out the Second World War, it's probably a better idea that we expose the time travel technologies and the timeline manipulations and all the potentials that can distort these stories, rather than try and get to the bottom of what the story is. Because when you're dealing with this sort of thing, it almost becomes irrelevant. But we do want to know who's on the team of like human sovereignty and liberation and who isn't, and it doesn't come down to all the diversity of species anymore. It comes down to, I mean, it does include that, but it comes down to the orientation that we hold. Are we service to others or service to self? If people don't like those concepts, I guess a better way to put it, or another way to put it, is, are we into unity consciousness, or are we all about power, domination, and control? And that's the way we were going to measure people in our lives and the leaders that we choose. And it's getting really old, and it's hard not to get angry, because we're not talking about a conspiracy club here. We're not talking about a little clique of people that are just into exposing weird stuff. This is the human race. This is our children's future. This is the environment, and every single one of us is impacted by this stuff. And I guess the one thing that I want to say is, there is a lot breathing down our neck, but we have foresight. We have the ability to know what's going on before it completely hooks us in. And I just encourage people to take all this very seriously and get your heads where they need to be, so that you're not a part of the problem and you're not enabling the very thing that you're going to be horrified to wake up to someday. Because the thing is, we're not at the mercy of what humans decide. I mean, if humanity doesn't wake up, it doesn't mean that those that are awakened are going to be taken down by that. We're offering something. It's all about opening that doorway and ushering souls into the new paradigm. But people have a free will choice here. So I just hope that they take it seriously enough, because if we can reach the tipping point, then we can bring the whole of humanity with us instead of just a few. And that's the bigger goal, is that we can all shift into these higher earth energies together and have justice on earth, hold the criminals accountable, and start to have leaders that have integrity, that can empower other leaders, so that we can all step up to the plate, because that's when the benevolent races are really going to show up for us. It's no different than our physical body when we're trying to heal. Our immune system shows up when we decide to change our lifestyle and we decide to actually care. So that's what I have to say.
I want to say one thing.
You're here.
Why I was brought here to begin with is we're going to have to get Andy elected. And the only way we can do this in this current high-tech everything society is the same way that my father and I got Senator Lawton Childs elected, is we have to go to all the people in person. And I mean, do the walking Lawton thing. Knock on every door, put out the flyers, put out the posters, put out the campaign things, and meet people. Not through the television, not through anything else. It'll never happen that way. We have to gain the people's trust about the truth. And that's where I'm at.
Well, it's going to be really hard to do that. For me, I don't know what the government would have to do. I guess they'd all have to quit for me to believe that there's any hope as far as them doing the right thing. I don't trust anybody in government right now. Obama, I think he is the furthest thing from the answer to our problems as there is, and and I hope somebody could sneak into the presidency, because here's a question I have, Andrew, and I'm not being I'm not being sarcastic with this, but we've always said that presidents are selected, not elected. how do you change that? How do you? I mean, if you get in, how do people know for sure? Because that's what a lot of people think it's not going to change.
Well, that's David Icke's statement that U.S. presidents aren't elected by ballot but selected by blood. We do have the evidence that all U.S. presidents but Martin Van Buren have been grandsons of King John Lackland Plantagenet, the English king, when the Magna Carta was signed in the year 1215, which I think after 8 centuries is really just a statement that all of them have had Western European blood. I probably have some of that on my Danish side. I'm not sure that that's as relevant as people think it is. It's almost to say that they're European. But I don't agree with David Icke's formulation. It's not accurate. I mean, it's offered from the right place, but it's not accurate. What actually has been going on is that since the advent of time travel and the quantum access that it affords by, let's say, the year 1970, the United States government has been scanning the future to identify future American leaders, to include the president and vice president and those vying for those offices, and has apprised the winners of the presidential elections of their destiny. I was trying to meet with Senator John Edwards when I was in North Carolina recently, but events overtook me. I still may make that approach to Senator Edwards, just to inform him of the fact that his name came up when I was having discussions with my father in the late 1980s, before his death in 1990. I think they had actually rendered a chronovisor image of one of Senator Edwards' To America speeches from the 2004 race. But in any case, what they've been doing is utilizing quantum access to identify future leaders and then bringing them into CIA activities as young men and compromising them. So really, as Alfred Weber has articulated in his journalism on this topic, what we're really looking at is a multi-dimensional cover-up in which quantum access has been used to identify who's president, and then the CIA has co-opted the presidency by making sure that future Americans, presidents and vice presidents, have been made members of the intelligence community before they leave college. I mean, Bill Clinton that I met at one of those lunches in Albuquerque circa 1969, 70, 71 was probably still at Georgetown, and he had just been informed of his future presidency. I was around 9 years of age, and George W. Bush was 24, 25, when he got right in my face at the La Hacienda restaurant in Albuquerque there in 71 and said, "Andy, have you heard? My daddy and I are going to be president." And he left. So the real model is more Strangelovian than David Icke has described it. It's not a simple sort of traditional, spotlight or internet kind of conspiracy that a cabal is in possession of the ability to engage itself in king-making and as selecting particular people and putting them in office. I mean, obviously people have been approached. I know that President Eisenhower, as Laura has described, was approached by Rockefeller about the prospect of running for the Republican nomination. But the model that they're selected and then made president is too simplistic. Actually, something more arcane has happened, something more metaphysically improbable, which they're being identified, and then they're being apprised of their presidencies and brought to the CIA. Look at the fact that Barack Obama traveled to Pakistan in 1981 when the State Department had imposed a travel ban on Americans going there. I mean, that's espionage. That was technically a violation of the Logan Act, in the sense that he was interacting with members of the ruling elite in Indonesia when Americans were prohibited from even traveling to that country. So that's really what we've been looking at. Now, was I one of those individuals who was surprised? I really can't say whether I was surprised in the same way that the other individuals that I knew of were, because I learned of my future presidency from my father and from another person with a lifelong career connection to the CIA, a man from Los Angeles who was one of our fellow Mars jumpers and training officers, a man by the name of Courtney Maurice Hunt. He was a first cousin of E. Howard Hunt of JFK assassination and Watergate fame. And I had discussed my presidency with my father in 1980, and then after all my schooling, when I cycled back and began contemplating it again, I called Courtney Hunt, and he affirmed that individuals who had been privy to the CIA reports in which future intelligence was being collected, excuse me, had indeed identified me as one of the people listed in those reports, so that when I was placed in the Mars Jump Room program as an 18-year-old in the summer of 1980 with Barack Obama, it was known that we were both future presidents. And that begs another question of why subject two future presidents to something so dangerous and mind-bending as what we experienced in the Mars Jump Room program. But that's how the story falls together. So it's really a matter of, I think the analogy maybe is what Albert Einstein said about the advent of nuclear weaponry, which is, we'll survive the atomic age if our social, I'm just paraphrasing here, but if basically the idea is if our social organization keeps up with our technical proficiency. What happened in the area of quantum access, that form of technical proficiency, is that the corruption of government around that technology far outpaced any potential to introduce the technology even on a limited access basis publicly. I mean, we can't have mass people engaging in mass time travel, mass timelines, because that would result in mass chaos. What I'm calling for is the implementation of Tesla teleportation for real-time transport. So, for example, somebody in London could jump to Sydney, Australia in several seconds rather than have to sit on a commercial airliner for 24 hours to go up to the other side of the planet. So that's really what we've been looking at, is that the CIA has accrued power to itself by exploiting this time travel technology to, in a sense, in a de facto sense, capture the presidency. And as somebody who swore an oath in 1996 when I became an attorney in Washington State to hold not only the Constitution of the state of Washington, but the United States Constitution, I'm speaking out because the protocols contained in Article 2 that determine how we select our president have been undermined by time travel. And that's something not even within the contemplation of the framers. So that's what's actually occurred, and that's why, for example, since he has been such a skillful political opportunist, that's why President Obama has not come forward. Because his very election utilized the exploitation of that technology and the knowledge that it brought for him to become president. So at this point, he has no personal interest in acknowledging that he participated in the secret space program that has implemented these technologies secretly. So that's the actual model, is one of pre-identification and briefing and compromise and co-optation of future presidents, not selection of them in a nefarious way along the traditional conspiracist model.
Hello?
Yeah.
Hello?
Oh, sorry about that. My mic was down. I say, why don't we take our break now, our last break, and then we'll come back and we'll have time to just go here, and we won't have to take any more breaks. So we'll get this next. We're going to get back to it here with all three of my guests, and I'd like to ask you this, Andrew, and that is the Mars that they're showing us now, the Mars that NASA tries to portray to us now. Is that the real Mars now, or are we being lied to?
Well, actually, one of the evidential proofs is that animals that we were educated about by Ed Dames during the part of the training program that focused on the biology of Mars, the exobiology of Mars, and animals that I encountered on the surface during my 40 or so jumps there, we've identified in NASA's pictures. So, for example, on Mars there are creatures that I call plesiosaurs, which are sort of like large tortoises, sometimes without shells, sometimes with sort of a shell-like exoskeleton. that have, the bulky body of a tortoise, the neck of a snake, and the head more of a horse-like head. This would, on Earth, the plesiosaurs were aquatic reptiles that didn't survive the KT extinction. On Mars, they are terrestrial creatures, and there are a lot of them. And in fact, Bernard Mendes has stated that this land-based plesiosaur is ubiquitous among the inhabited planets that we have thus far explored, beyond Mars. So it's my position that if you look at the very best evidence of life on Mars, including a number of the animals that I included in my paper, The Discovery of Life on Mars, which I published in 2008, that yes, the Mars that we're seeing, or at least portions of the actual Mars that we went to, are being depicted in NASA JPL images from the rover Spirit, Opportunity, and Curiosity.
I see. Okay. Laura, questions were coming in for you, so I'll just kind of sum it up. And what people want to know is that were you, when you were approached, who were you approached by, and what exactly did they want from you?
Who was I approached by and what did they want from me? Yeah. I was approached by somebody who I guess you could say was representing a larger group connected to MJ12. They're actually called the Aviary. You can Google them and find out a little bit more about them. The name to put in, though, into the search bar would be John Alexander. A very important website comes up, which validates all that I was picking up on when I was dealing with them. And basically the person that approached me at a gathering, and I didn't find out till about 6 months later that he was specifically sent to find me at this location. When I met him, I thought that I had just met somebody that was interested in going to Mars. He was starting to fill me in on some of the information he was getting from these secret meetings. He wanted me to be very quiet about it, but basically I thought I had met somebody who is just wanting to take me along for the ride, and I didn't really understand till later that I was specifically targeted, and it wasn't something they really wanted me to have a choice about, and it was very set up. Using looking glass technologies are the technologies that were later mentioned, and I noticed that he was under some form of control. He had abduction experiences, and that's when this group pulled him in, but I was getting a feeling that this group had something to do with those abductions because he was getting telepathic information from a race of beings that were guiding him about this trip to Mars, and I was getting the feeling that it was artificial telepathy. But I didn't have any Project Camelot. I didn't have Andrew Bashago as a colleague and friend. There were no whistleblowers in my life, so...
Go ahead, Ben.
Sorry about that, head dog.
Oh, okay. And we have a question for both you, Andrew, and Laura from the chat room. And if Andrew, if you got your speakers up a little bit in the background, please turn them down just a bit because they're echoing back.
Okay.
All right. The question is, would Andy and Laura agree that Ed Dames is using his remote viewing seminars to find folks that have remote viewing talent? He says, I was told at one time that some that attend could end up in my labs if they showed talent. And that question was for both of you.
Well, I first encountered Major Ed Dames back when he was still a captain during one of my summers in Project Pegasus as a child, where Ed was essentially one of the facilitators utilizing me as a government psychic in the Montauk chair, which is a magnetic transducer that amplifies human psychic performance so that you pre-experience moments in your subjective future, and then you're questioned about what you saw that might provide or allow the government to derive information about the future that you saw yourself in. During some of those remote viewing sessions or astral projections in the Montauk chair, he was giving me a small metabolite of mescaline. And I was not only an involuntary human subject experimentee, but I was a child. I then encountered him almost a decade later when I was in college and I served in the Mars Jump Room program. He was our training officer. That was in 1980. Ed reports that he became involved in remote viewing in 1982. Of course, the great psychic Ingo Swann had placed the advent of remote viewing at Stanford Research Institute under himself in 1972, but that can't be accurate information either, because I was doing excuse me, conventional remote viewing for the Office of Naval Intelligence, including searching for Lieutenant John McCain in captivity in Vietnam in the fall of 1969. So the Navy was already working with kids in fall of 69. So, Ed's entry into remote viewing was kind of late. It conspicuously followed his involvement in U.S. government time travel and Mars visitation activities, two technical activities that remain top secret and that have not been officially acknowledged by the U.S. government. We've had an ample amount of information about the remote viewing program, Operation Grilled Flame, and the kinds of activities that the aviary, as a faction within the intelligence community that Laura describes, were involved in since, let's say, the publication of Jim Schnabel's book about the U.S. government remote viewing program in 1989. So Ed is kind of conspicuous because he came to the remote viewing game kind of late. He's never talked about his activities in time travel and in training Mars jumpers. We know that everybody who was training the U.S. chrononauts to go to Mars had to go there him or herself at least once. So Ed is presumably or presumptively a Mars visitor. He began describing his remote viewing activities about 25 years ago on Coast to Coast AM, back when its host was Art Bell, and has been associated with some very fearsome predictions that have not come true. For example, his so-called kill shot from the sun, which I think we evaded in 2012 when that solar flare almost hit us, and that obviously would have been a global catastrophe had it done so. Are people who are attending his seminars vulnerable to potential recruitment, as the questioner asks? I'm not prepared to answer that, because that asks me to speculate about an unethical activity that I have no knowledge of Ed perpetrating. So I'd rather not comment, but I would like to comment that, he's a military veteran, he was an officer, and as a result, he swore a military oath to maintain secrecy. So if Ed was to come forward on what he's really done for the U.S. government beyond the acceptable talking point of remote viewing, which seems to have been sort of a public revelation, the revelation of government information in a controlled way, a sort of public limited hangout, to use a phrase from Watergate. Mm-hmm. If he was to talk about time travel and Mars visitation, Ed would subject himself to prosecution under JANAP 146E, which carries a penalty of 10 years at Fort Leavenworth Prison, a $10,000 fine, and the forfeiture of his federal military pension, which may very well be his retirement. So he has not been as free to act as I have been, as someone who was not career military, was not career CIA, but was really exploited as an indigo child, and then as a young adult explorer. And so I would certainly urge the questioner to be cautious about attending Ed's seminars or working with him, because I can testify to the fact that he has concealed what he has done for the U.S. government. And so he's engaged in deception that he's had to engage in to save his military pension and prevent himself from being militarily prosecuted, which are constraints and considerations that I have not had to deal with. So yes, I would urge caution, but I don't want to say more and indicate that I have any evidence that Ed would do something unethical and bring a gifted psychic into a government project, let's say involuntarily, simply as a function of attending one of his seminars. I can't say that.
Laura, okay. So yeah, I'll tell you, folks, we've had issues tonight. Laura, they wanted to hear, or the listener wanted your take on that as well.
Can you rephrase the question just so I don't go off on a tangent?
Sure. He wanted asked if let me try to remember how he phrased it, but he basically asked if Ed Dames is using his remote viewing seminars to kind of find out, who's got the remote viewing abilities, and if he does find people who do, is he using, are these people ending up in like MILABs or or something along those lines.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine this is a name. This is the name that Andy and I discussed. Ed Dames came up when I was dealing with the Mars recruiters. I was trying to find out and write down as many names as I could because I didn't have direct access to the group of people. It was only through my partner. And, you know, a whole list of names came up, and Ed Dames was one of them. And, of course, he was the one that taught the Mars training program. He's the one that came on Coast to Coast and cussed us out for bringing him up. Well, he cussed Andy out because Andy was the one, of course, talking about him. And they actually muted quite a bit of it. And this is, you know, going back to the Stanford Research Institute and just how the CIA just kind of went in there and pulled in, you know, the remote viewers, and I would suspect that they turned them into programmers or recruiters themselves. So that's all I'm going to say on it, and I think Andy covered pretty much everything.
All right, and I'll say this: I have invited Ed Dames on this show several times in the first few years I was on the air. Since then, I have had no interest, but I have invited him on, and he never would even bother with me. So I guess you got to be, you know, in that group for some of these people. But I don't know. What do you think, Ben?
That sounds like what's everybody's being blinded about is right here on the internet. I mean, go look at the viewer counts, right? That's a clue to the program in the web page that keeps track. They can have a log for, so they can go back and figure out what was said or shown or heard, you know, and how it's being redirected. And so when I first started learning web design, when they had dial-up, and was working on a program that involved live audio video streaming. And little did I know this, but until later on, the information was being stolen from me, all of it, through a program inside the Yahoo servers. The major internet powerhouses like the Googles, the Amazon, Facebook, Twitter, and especially YouTube, they're all interconnected. And so what they're doing is they're throwing such false information out there. They're doing an identical of what television is all about. And that goes back to what I said earlier. You have to disconnect. You don't have to listen to this stuff. And by saying that, it opens the door for what they don't want you to hear, because we're hearing it by mouth or by mail, real mail, because everything else is so controlled. What are we really seeing here? The truth? I doubt it.
No, only what they want us to see.
Currency reset, you know, the asteroid, the Planet X. Are we going to ascend to another density? Well, who created all these stories? The media, all of it. And if they say somebody saw an alien, I want to see the proof, and I've been saying that all along. I was abducted. I can't prove any of it. And it could be what I've run across recently is PSYOPs, which is all related to these secret programs. And here's what the truth principle that Andy is, or should I say Mr. President, is why I was sent back in time and on a different timeline. I chose to take that red pill because the blue one is where what we see in real life right now. We're just doing everything, stuff that they want you to do. And it's being done through everything, including the cell towers, all that. Satellites, they're banging us. So the American people has to stand up and fight back peacefully.
Well, I'd like to go peacefully, and I'd love to see it that way, and I don't know how it ever could. I mean, half of the population are so mind-controlled that all they need to do is send out a couple dummies, and all the sheep will follow those dummies to loot stores and steal TVs, and, you know, and so those are the people we've got to contend with.
Take their guns away.
Well, that's what they want to do, take everyone's... Yeah.
They're scared of us, all of us. And to Laura, this is what the consciousness awareness is about. It's not waking them up. We have to shock them. You have to give them electric shock. And if we want them to follow us into what they want us to do, is start some internal unrest, so they could call in UN and, oh, no se habla, and they shoot us, just like World War II. It's history repeating itself. And so now that we're so aware, we have to do it in a more dignified way.
And we also have to understand during this shift, I mean, the veils between life and death have the potential of lifting. We're working also with Uranus, which rules Aquarius, which is connected to the electrical light energy of spirit, which stimulates our nervous system and helps to shake off any frequency manipulations or any electronic controls. And so the whole deal is that we want to connect to the higher frequency of electrical light energy that's organic in order to counteract the lower frequency energy that comes from artificial intelligence systems and the nanoparticles and all the different things that they're trying to embed us with so that they can control us. And this is the time right now. Yeah.
And that's a hallucinogen, which is being catalyzed by other chemicals put in the food, the GMO, the chemicals. It's all connected. I mean, they're saturating the human mind so bad that they cannot wake up. And so they even said that in the Matrix documents early on, where it said those are the ones that cannot comprehend. They don't have the intelligence. They don't have, the drive, any of that. And that's because of what's being suppressed. You can't wake them all. And that's what I would like to do. You would like to do. Andrew wants to open it up. And if this is what the movement's all about, yeah, we have to do it,
Yeah, absolutely.
In the open.
Well, here's another question. Michael, can you ask Laura? Laura, is this your official statement? You are running as vice president, and your mate Andrew is running as president. So I think somebody wants you to be the VP.
Well, that's awesome. I do need some time to discuss with Andy, so I'm not going to make any statement right now, but he certainly has my complete and total support. I just need to sort of wait on that, but I'm definitely into building a new paradigm and having a safety zone while he's doing this, because he's also a major leader in the truth movement, so that we kind of have all bases covered, if you know what I mean.
Okay, absolutely.
Just,
I think it was a few years back, I asked Jesse Ventura about that with Ron Paul, and he says, why do I have to be VP? So maybe you don't have to be VP, but whoever it is, it'd still be good. But we've got another question here. Says, one more question. Does Andy think that the Sandy Hook false flag event could have been similar to his own experience of being part of a group of gifted young people who were chosen to teleport to another planet? And so I don't know where that one's going, but that's for you, Andrew.
Well, in fact, I served in two different U.S. defense projects. The first in childhood, Project Pegasus, in the late 60s and early 1970s, was under DARPA, and we only went to past and future locations on this planet. In fact, the only off-planet literature I was exposed to officially in Project Pegasus as a school-age, elementary school-aged youngster, was some of the literature from Project Moondust, that we might do things like land a rocket ship on the moon and then use the fuselage of the rocket as a habitat that we would bury under the Martian, or under the lunar surface. There was no official discussion of Mars, but there was some briefing of my father that some of the kids in Pegasus were headed for Mars later in life. Brainwashing was used to control us, but I've proven through years of investigation that our experiences were real and not fictive or imaginary or induced. So I don't think there's really an analogy to any kind of false flag like Sandy Hook that's been launched, because after all, we weren't being brainwashed to be instruments of agency. We were being potentiated in Project Pegasus as school children. By that I mean we received alpha intelligence training to do things like observe things accurately, surveil people and things, remember things accurately by placing them in our brains in a certain way, or in our minds in a certain way, to be able to report back accurately. So they were looking for children who were very perceptive, very responsive to new information and to the environment around them, and who were able to remember what they saw and what happened to them and report back accurately in complete sentences. So we weren't being mind controlled. And I think I've been very ethical about describing the fact that we were subjected to the suppression of memory, and that is pure brainwashing on the North Korean model from the 50s. But that doesn't involve becoming a Manchurian candidate where you're being used as an instrument of agency, the agency of other people, the will of others. We were subjected to the opposite. We were trained to be authentic and original actors when we were in these non-local locations in time-space, and then the government was relying on the same authentic interaction with the environment when we were sent to Mars. Look at the I wouldn't say unconventional personalities, but look at the mild eccentricities of all of the Mars people that we've so far brought forward. Definitely a very sensitive, perceptive group of people, including, I might add, a young Barack Obama. He was a pretty remarkable guy. I would say the same thing for my friend and comrade William Stillings, who was the youngest of the jumpers. So no, I don't think there's an analogy, but I want to take the opportunity to go back and mention a few things about why I knew Laura was an authentic truth teller and whistleblower right from the get-go. When Alfred threw us together in a radio interview in 2010, 2011 timeframe, she was talking about this involvement of the U.S. intelligence faction known as the Aviary in attempting her Mars recruitment in 2006 and 7. And one of those members of the Aviary is the naval officer C.B. Scott Jones. And when I began investigating my experiences around the year 2000, I was directed by Jean Maria Arrigo, the ethicist who works closely with the U.S. military and intelligence community, to contact C.B. Scott Jones. So Laura was, I was directed to a member of the Aviary when my memories began. I began returning to my memories and actively investigating them, my project memories. Laura was directed towards the same faction to be recruited to settle on Mars. That's a small group of people if you consider the fact that we have 7 billion human beings on this planet for both of us to have been directed to. So that piqued my interest immediately. And then as we began to develop the Mars experiences of myself and my fellow chrononauts Stillings and Mendez in about 100 Skype teleconferences that were undertaken in 2010 and 11, around the time that Alfred threw me together with Laura, I realized that I had met Laura's aunt, Mary Jean Eisenhower, a granddaughter of President and Mamie Eisenhower, during what Bernard Mendez and I describe as the night run. That's where we did a jump up to Mars with Mary Jean Eisenhower, Regina Dugan, who we were trained with. We weren't trained with Mary Jean Eisenhower, and a third female that we've not been able to identify by name. Curiously, or consistently, it may interest the listeners that Mary Jean Eisenhower for many years has served as the president of the People-to-People Ambassadors Program, which is a second-level diplomacy project that was begun by President Eisenhower, her grandfather. And in fact, I was invited on several of those junkets as an attorney and as a constitutional specialist. So they were working through families, and clearly in the same way that William Stillings and I were thrown into training, and then I ultimately did one jump to Mars with my father, as another Republican family with ties to that Nixon faction that was in possession of this technology. Because after all, quantum access emerged under the first administration of Richard M. Nixon from 1968 to 72. That was sort of the heyday of U.S. time travel when these devices were developed. So they were also working through or approaching members of the Eisenhower family, and that's completely consistent with their reliance on the Eisenhower-Nixon faction within the Republican Party to recruit engineers and their children and so forth, because my father and William's father were basically partisan Republicans who interacted with the astronauts and some of these Republican oligarchs involved in the defense community, people like Howard Hughes, for example. So that was consistent. But what really grabbed me and caused me to know to a scientific certainty that Laura was for real, and she was a real truth teller. She was telling the truth, and that the recruitment campaign directed at her in 2006 and 7 had happened, was that she described the fact that she was told that the conveyance that would take her and her boys to Mars was called an ark. And I remembered that during our training, Major Dames had described the technical term for the jump rooms as aeronautical repositioning chambers. Because you'd go in a conventional elevator, and it had, like the one at 999 North Sepulveda in El Segundo, California, and it would morph from a box into a cylinder and then back into a box, and when the door on the opposite side of the elevator opened, we had been aeronautically repositioned elsewhere in the universe in a chamber, namely inside of a conventional elevator that had been outfitted with this teleportation capability. So there's no possibility that that could have been accidental. So I've known since Alfred invited Laura and I to appear on Exopolitics Radio back in that 2010-2011 period when many truth tellers began to come forward. I knew at that point to an historical and personal certainty that Laura was telling the truth because of those very close factual consistencies between our memories.
I just want to thank you for that, Andy.
Well, thank you. Yeah. And I think that, we all make choices and take a certain path in life. I don't really think ultimately it's cosmically significant that, let's say, your aunt and I decided to go and you made a personal choice not to, because quite frankly, we were pretty brutally traumatized by the Mars Jump Room program. People will tell me, oh, you were so lucky to go to another planet. Actually, I describe it as kind of a season in hell. It was very unpleasant, and I know that your aunt has been ill. I've been struggling with medical problems in recent years as well. I believe that we were probably injured by the jump room experience, but certainly on a psychological level, having the stress of going there and not knowing whether we were going to be eaten by predators, whether we would be stranded in a hostile environment millions of miles from home, was extremely stressful. So on one level, I think it was entirely understandable and maybe a wise decision that you made to honor Gaia and recognize that your mission was here on planet Earth and that you didn't need to undergo the alienating and deracinating experience of going to Mars, which is a formidable and hellish environment to visit.
Yeah. Well, and I was going to say, I'm sorry, for some reason, twice tonight, my mic is muted on me, so I didn't mean to have the dead air there. But Laura, I was going to say, you're welcome to get anything out if you'd like. I know you want. Sure, go right ahead.
It was a perfect segue, what Andy just said. It was not an easy decision to make because I'm really here to be of service to humanity. But I was very aware of my mission as a child, and it had everything to do with the shift time we're in. I was shown, timelines. I was also, I guess you could say, warned that everything would be ripped away from me or I would be taken away. And I was a young kid, and I don't really have it all like word for word. And my whole life has been about this shift time we're in because the natural stargates are opening. We have a great potential to move into higher Earth energies. And I do feel that we're, meant to go to the stars and we're meant to explore space. And I know Andy agrees with me, and we've had a joint quote about it. It's going to be very difficult to want to be a part of that or support it if the human race is kept in the dark, and if these technologies aren't exposed and used in a way that's going to assist those that need food and those that need help. And I think him and I both agree that it would be very difficult to go along with any sort of program that doesn't honor the rights of the human race. And this is why we have leadership roles, because we have things to expose and we have that level of integrity and compassion and concern for the human race and also this planetary body. And we want to be responsible about the way that we handle indigenous cultures and life on other planets other than our own. And these are the priorities. Once the priorities are addressed, I'm excited about all sorts of things. But until they're addressed, there's no way that I can walk away from what is most important, because we cannot possibly shift into higher earth energies if we don't first embrace the responsibility we each have, also our integrity, and what it really means to be a global citizen, and what it really means to care about your fellow human, and to be linked with individuals that are keeping the secret, even though a lot of individuals are well-intentioned. And I understand a lot of the secrecy and the reasons for it early on. But I also see how that has completely not served us and made sort of this infection and infiltration spread behind the scenes that has compromised the initial intention of some of these agendas. So I just wanted to add all of that. And I'm not sure if you remember the quote, Andy, but I really liked it. I've used it quite a bit since we came up with it together. And you really added a whole dimension to it, and the way you edited it, it's a great quote. So I don't want to tease anybody with it, but I don't know if you remember it, or if
Oh no, I have it. We made a joint statement about the fact that we need to explore the cosmos, and it actually is a good public policy decision to ultimately protect the human genome by establishing colonies on other celestial bodies, because if God forbid this planet is compromised, we would want the human race to propagate itself and continue into the future. We are a huge package of genetic information that needs to be protected. But when that's done in a way that compromises individual liberty, or is done in a racist way where the diversity of the human genome is not represented in the colonies, or is done on the basis of secrecy so that the lion's share of humanity is kept out of the very space projects that are being launched to protect the human genome, that's not a good development in government. That's a pathological development that needs to be confronted in its very unethicality. So I'm kind of paraphrasing what we said, but I remember that joint statement that we published, and I cherish it because it's the truth. That's what happened to the Mars project. It's a great thing to protect the human genome. I think that under Randy Kramer's testimony, that's now evolved into the position that there may now have been a conspiracy under Vice President Cheney to actually maybe create a thrivable Mars colony and then attrit the population on Earth, which is crazy making, because Earth is incredibly biotically rich compared to Mars. Mars is essentially a desert planet with a very low sustainability quotient. It has only minimal vegetation, minimal water deposits. Most of its approximately 1 million humanoid inhabitants live primarily underground. It's not a very good survival post for what we understand as global human civilization. We have to protect this planet from disaster. It would make much more sense, for example, to try to protect Earth using Mars as a military outpost, where we would, for example, use projectiles or directed energy weapons to divert asteroids away from Earth, from striking Earth, or to explode them, rather than to view Mars as the next Noah's Ark for the biotic diversity of the Earth biosphere, because it simply is not a very biotically rich planet. It's almost devoid of life. So why create a way station for human genetic integrity that can't sustain a very large carrying capacity? It doesn't make any sense at all.
Here we go with the time travel program, Mars, and if it's preparing for an invasion, which everybody spreads around the internet, it's a false flag and all these things. Well, what if it's not? What if this is really going on? I mean, Sean David Morton wrote a very good novel. I just finished it over the weekend, which was based on true, information. And of course, learning how to be a writer from my recent college education is the fact that you have to have a fiction a story to make it fiction. And so, having said that, that means that the Mars program is to divert with this energy beam weapon. And is it really Planet X coming? I mean, there was a show last night on Ellen about that. Or is it an asteroid? Or is it the global currency reset? and they're putting Jade Helm 15. I mean, this is the negativity. And this is what Laura's been saying all along. We got to wake them up. Well,
but
you know,
then, yeah.
That's
also,
where it's headed. Yeah.
Yeah. Let me interject, because we have evidence from a very thoughtful man, a very intelligent man, namely somebody I deeply admire, which is Graham Hancock. In his book, The Mars Mystery, he showed how the previous civilization on Earth, the civilization that was the great maritime civilization that built the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx and spread its pyramidal culture from the Middle East to Mesoamerica to Southeast Asia to the Grand Canyon even, we now know, was eclipsed when it was struck by something from space. It clearly wasn't Planet X, but it devastated Mars. It fractured Mars into a more oblate spheroid than Earth, and it also devastated life on Earth and caused a deluge on both planets. That's what caused Mars to become the vast muddy wasteland that Richard C. Hoagland has identified. That's what led to the long period of underdevelopment that followed the High Egyptian civilization. You know, Ötzi, the Italian Iceman, was from 5,500 years ago. So he was born 6,000 years after that catastrophe, and yet as a sort of a caveman, sort of a hunter living in clothing made out of animal skins, he had over 40 tools on his person when he was killed, actually with an arrow in the back. So what I'm suggesting here is that there was a long period between roughly 11,500 years ago and roughly 5,000 years ago where we were attempting to patch civilization back together again after it had been utterly devastated on Mars and Earth by something that struck both planets from space. So I do agree with your general premise that we live in a world in which there is a lot of fear-mongering, and it sort of is accelerated not just by the mass media, but by an internet culture that is predominantly paranoid and fear-based. But at the same time, we have to utilize science and applied science to protect ourselves from anything that might hit our planet from outer space. It could be nothing more than a very elaborate meteor shower that if enough rocks landed in the ocean, we might have displacements of water, we might have objects that would destroy major population centers or kick up nuclear winter type conditions. So I think that would be a benevolent use of Mars to try to knock that stuff down so we don't lose this civilization. Because it's going to take thousands of years to patch civilization together again. And I think that would be a catastrophe that would almost be incalculable given the population of the Earth at this time. So when I was told by Courtney Hunt that the Mars Project existed to protect the existence of human life, I think that's why it was begun. I don't know whether its purpose has been diverted, as Randy Kramer has suggested, into something nefarious. But when I was serving in the Mars program, we were told that it was to create an extraterrestrial defense regime broadly defined, not just involving fending off hostile extraterrestrial beings, but knocking down threats from space that would compromise planet Earth.
And they probably
I think that's responsible. I think that's a responsible use of government and of science, and even military deployment. Rather than killing each other in internecine warfare, I think we should be pointing our rockets not at each other, but at asteroids that might destroy our planet. And I think that's why the Mars program was begun. I hope that it's still been dedicated to those kinds of pro-social purposes.
Well, part of the message that I was shown in the future was the year 2026, but I was shown two timelines, and during one of these timelines, the one I've been following, are these recognitions, the signs, and it's just, in the essence of it all means that we are on that timeline. But here we go back that 70 years, and what I was told was going to take 50 years. I mean, that was 20 years before my time, but we're in that time frame. So they do know something. And if it's such a big secret and they still want to control us for whatever monetary-based structure this, civilization is all about, it's all going to have to come to an end and evolve. It's inevitable. And they're doing everything they can to stop it. And they put everything in place to prevent it. But I'm saying, this is my mission. I'm here to say, it's not. It's over. Because we have it in place. That's you, and it's possibly Obama. And he just hasn't shown his hand yet. And that's how a good poker player does it. You got to ace up your sleeve, and sure, I'm going to call you. Because that's how you beat the negativity. And I've been hiding from it for 39 years under the fears and the threats and the similar stories that are coming out everywhere. And everybody's got the same, illusion. No, it's the same feeling. And you know it. You'll know it when it hits you. And that's how you wake them up.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and I've been trying for the last 8 years to wake up as many people as I can, but what I've learned is for those who are too badly brainwashed, you've got to move on. You can't waste time with people no more, because
I said that earlier.
I don't feel like time's something we have anymore. So I think we need to definitely pick it up. And I've got more questions here from the chat. Can any one of you, it says Andy, but I think we could throw this to all three of you. Do you think that with millions of people that go missing each year and are never accounted for, do you think that they're being teleported off the planet?
Food for the reptilians.
Laura? Andrew? What do you guys think?
Well, I think that, again, we have to avoid either-or thinking, because if you're talking about a subject as diverse or broad as missing people, people are disappearing for all kinds of reasons. One of the cover-ups that I wish to address as president is the fact that the Saudi government, the Saudi regime, under the Saudi royal family, has been abducting Western girls since the 1950s to raise them as sexual slaves, namely concubines, in a kind of medieval enslavement, and household servants and so forth. And our government and other Western governments has been complicit in this now for almost 70 years, for several human generations, because of the very rich oil deposits in Saudi Arabia and Saudi involvement in international finance. That's a human rights travesty that has to end. And as President of the United States, I will be demanding that the Saudi regime provide the executive office of the president, the names of all of those victims of white slavery. So some of our children have been going missing because they've been impressed into service by the Saudi royal family. There also has been a conspiracy involving different factions. In the past, when I was after I went to Mars, I was on an intelligence project that was a joint venture between Interpol and the National Security Agency, involving an illicit traffic in children being carried out by KGB in the United States and Canada, organized crime in the United States, and a far left faction on campus to abduct American and other Western children to sell them to essentially sell them to the Illuminati, which it was explained to me is the actual Illuminati is kind of an international club that competes in committing debauched acts. So those children were forced into prostitution in different cities of the world, to include Bangkok, Thailand, and Amsterdam in the Netherlands, where there's a rich prostitution, trafficking, and trade. They were used in snuff films, they were used in ritual sacrifices, and so forth. So I'm proud to say that I served in that program, trying to, in those days we would talk about children being placed on milk cartons. We're not doing that anymore, but I'm proud to say that I kept some kids off of milk cartons during the 1980s and later. So some missing people have been forced into essentially the hands of the sickest kind of people you could imagine. And while people say that the United States government is a function of the Illuminati, in fact, in that program we were at war with the Illuminati, and it was a real organization. It was a transnational organization at that. So there are principled people in government who have tried to protect our own children from abduction by sociopaths who were inflicting the worst kinds of fates on these children. Some people just go missing. They'll go hiking and fall into an abandoned mine shaft and die. Some people commit suicide in ways where they go off and disguise their death. Some people just, as David Paulides has described, some people just go missing, and it's not a crime to be a missing person. Some people just walk away from their lives. Some children are abducted by the opposing spouse in marital conflicts where the parent who's the abducting parent has been denied visitation of their children and so forth. So it's a very multi-dimensional problem. I must admit, though, that one of the dangers that we are confronted by living on a spherical planet, if in fact we do live on a spherical planet, or even on a flat Earth, is that we live beneath the sky. And we know it's the official position in the United States that in the modern era we have been visited by at least 57 different extraterrestrial species. 4 particular species frequently, and my testimony from the 4th grade, from 70-71, directly corresponds to recent testimony by the Honorable Paul T. Hellyer of Canada, who was serving as Defense Minister of Canada in the early 70s, and that is that the 4 ET species visiting us frequently are the small grays, the tall grays, the reptilians, and the Nordics. And it's been alleged that the reptilians eat human flesh. Now let me counter that by saying that my good friend Bernard Mendez, one of my fellow Mars jumpers, is essentially the Indiana Jones of ET human liaison. And he states that those stories can't be true. You know, if reptilians eating human flesh while traveling their cigar ships around our planet or above our planet, because none of the ET species visiting our Earth are carnivores. They're all vegetarian creatures. So I hesitate to say yes to that particular cause of the missing person problem. I think most of the people are going missing for those kinds of very human and criminal reasons that I've identified, but we can't omit from our multidimensional analysis of the missing person problem that probably some people have been abducted and taken off planet. You know, let me just mention one aspect of this on Mars. In my paper, The Discovery of Life on Mars, I show that the ravine west of the home plate plateau, where the rover Spirit was located, in the west valley of the Columbia Hills region of the Gusev crater of Mars, shooting to the west, that ravine beyond that is depicted in NASA JPL image 10214, 10214, which was the NASA JPL image that I built my paper around, is choked with human bodies. You can see that they are male and female. The men are dressed in sky blue shirts and pants. The women are dressed in full-length dresses of the same color. Most of the people are lying prone as if deceased. There's one picture of a man trying to stumble out of this morass of bodies, and I isolated an image of a large serpent slithering across the bodies. This evidence of either a mass open-air graveyard or of a genocidal killing field, or of, let's say, those who perished on Mars after being impressed into slave labor there, which has now been supported by some of Corey Good's disclosures, has been ignored by the international press. And I think it's lamentable that we did such a great job after World War II in that heroic battle that Laura's great-grandfather led militarily, and we addressed the Nazi atrocities, and we articulated under Mrs. Roosevelt the UN Convention on Human Rights, and we're still paying attention to past Holocausts, but we're ignoring the evidence of a possible Holocaust on one of our neighboring planets. There are literally hundreds of bodies that I analyzed and I show in my paper. And I would meet with anybody in or out of government to describe those images. So I just want to say that it's possible that those individuals were abducted on Earth, but again, we don't have direct evidence of that.
I see. And we had just lost Laura. I don't know if it looks like her connection might have gone. So, Laura, if you're listening, and you want to get back in here for the finisher, feel free to do so. If I see her turn green there, I'll put her back on. But we are getting near the end, and what I'd like to do is give you both an opportunity to get out what you like. But first, I have another question here from our chat room, and it says, question, are they, Andy and Laura, familiar with the story of Ingo Swanna, experience of the moon when he was detected and seemed to suffer damage mentally from it? Are you familiar with that at all?
Yes, the listener's referring to an event in the remote viewing career of Ingo Swann, who helped pioneer remote viewing at SRI, according to his timeline, beginning in 1972. Although I just previously mentioned in this show that the children in Project Pegasus were remote viewing for the Office of Naval Intelligence as early as fall of 1969. What happened is he basically picked up images of structures and occupants of the moon and then had a personal health reaction from it as if he had been hit by them. We also obviously have the testimony of Neil Armstrong that, quote-unquote, they're across the crater looking at us. And I would be remiss not to mention that my dear friend and colleague Brett Collins Shepard, who founded the Lunar Anomaly Research Society on Facebook shortly after I founded the Mars Anomaly Research Society on Facebook, has identified lunarians. He has identified very blunt-faced humanoids who appear to have evolved as natural occupants of the moon. So I would leave that to another interview by yourself, Michael, of Brett Collins Shepard. But I was very impressed by the details of lunarians that Brett has analyzed, that he's derived from NASA's images. Of course, Brett and I have something in common, which is that as school children, we were shown our future discoveries on Mars and the moon, respectively. I stay away from the moon because I was never there. It was only mentioned briefly in passing when I was serving in Pegasus. I was not going there in college. I was going to Mars. So I'm making Mars a lifetime emphasis, a lifetime specialty. But Brett and his partner, Karen Christine Patrick, are really doing yeoman work. And Brett, a number of years ago, derived those images of lunarians. So I think the implication is that, we grew up in a Copernican world, but one in which religion, philosophy, and science told us that we were the only inhabited planet in our solar system. And it's kind of fun to be alive, I think, because we're living in the era where that's simply shown not to be true. The moon is inhabited, and Mars is inhabited, and likely other planets or moons in our solar system have at least seen visitation by humanoids. For example, Iapetus, one of the moons of Jupiter, has evidence of mining activity going on, and there's also a large pteroglyph of a humanoid face on Enceladus, which is one of the moons of Saturn. And also, of course, there's the ring makers of Saturn in the ring around Saturn that Norman Berggren has so articulately described. So the bottom line is that from pre-antiquity, there has been humanoid activity in our solar system that seems to have resulted from both indigenous exploration by beings who evolved here in our solar system and also by extraterrestrial visitors to our solar system.
I see. And, people, there's two types of people that I run into a lot, and there's those who are waiting for either Jesus to come back or those who are waiting for the ETs to come and save us. And I say this often because it needs to be said, and the fact is, folks, if you're not going to get off your keisters and do something yourselves, why would anybody bother coming to help us? So, I think it starts with each and every one of us. I think we all need to, I know we all need to come together. And if we come together, we wouldn't need ET to come and remove the evil at power. We can do it. We have the power to do it, we the people. But we're only powerful when we're together. And Ben, what about you? What say you?
I've got a final comment, and I got it listed. I'm just going to play it, and read it. Okay. It comes from the very end of the Matrix documents that, of course, the author wants like $300 for online. So it says this. You might want to ask yourself, what can I do? And the immediate answer is one. Try to become an aware being and realize the power that you do have. You have no limitations except those which you agree to. Number two, stabilize your resonant level in a positive way. Try and work on your orientation. The ultimate orientation is unconditional love and non-judgment. Number three, constructively resist attempts to pervert the planet and its population by those who would destroy it for their own profit and gain. Resistance is constructive only when it results in a positive change. Number four, you're a member of the living universe. Every being is a living manifestation of the potential of all that is. Try and conduct your existence with this in mind. Number five, a lot of people have made mistakes. Recognize that these mistakes have been made in the course of their evolution, and let's work together on the ultimate goal of blending with other cultures, maximizing the differentiation and production of evolving realities. Number six, negatively oriented entities will not hang around the planet if no one will let them. You as a people have that choice. Work to educate others in a way that they will understand. When they are ready, they will know. So that we can collectively become of one mind. And so that we can collectively slow our evolution as a planet. Number seven, work to take care of the living earth. We need to clean up our act using primary energy sources, work toward release of data that will permit the conversation to these modes of energy. And the final one says, there are plenty of races out there who are positively oriented, ones who would like to see the terrestrials evolve into positive interaction. We're not alone in this universe, and we need to mature and recognize that fact and stop playing the Orion-based reality hoax. Stop fooling yourself into inaction, and let's work together to develop new approaches where all beings will benefit. And that's the last one.
I see. All right. So we're going to bring Laura back in. She's going to be back just in time. Laura, I'd like to give you the floor now and get out anything that you'd like. And sorry, we've had some technical issues. We seem to have lost you for a minute there, but welcome back.
She had to go feed her kids.
Oh.
I placed the order, and then I saw the messages. So here I am, and I guess I'm going to make some closing statements here.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, I just want to just say thank you, so much to all of you. It's been just amazing. Thank you, Ben, for pulling this together. Thank you, Andy, for everything that you shared. Thank you, Michael, for having us. And just everybody who's listening, pay attention to this election. Pay attention to Andrew Bashago and everything that he's about. He's got integrity. He has, knowledge and wisdom that is so incredibly critical and important for the human race to be aware of. His leadership abilities are immense, and I support him in every way. And there's going to be a lot more from us, and I just look forward to sharing when the time is right. And thank you so much for listening. And just educate yourself about this stuff. And this is a time of empowerment and liberation. Let any fear be a catalyst for reaching into your highest potential, because that's exactly where it can take you.
You couldn't have said it any better myself. Laura, thank you so much for being a guest tonight. Andrew, thank you. And if you'd like to direct people to websites or anything else, by all means, go right ahead.
Well, I'd like to make a final statement, because I was sort of answering a question last time around.
Okay,
but I just want to say that I'm clear. I thank you, Laura, for those very kind remarks, and I'm sure we'll have substantive discussions about the campaign soon. But I'm very clear about why I'm running in 2016, and should I not be elected, I'm going to run again in 2020, should God keep me alive. But and let me analogize to 1860. It wasn't an accident that we had a civil war break out after the election of Abraham Lincoln. Because if you go back to Abraham Lincoln's 1860 campaign song, Lincoln in Liberty, you'll see that he ran as the abolition anti-slavery candidate for president and was elected. Now, slavery involved the physical oppression of human beings and hence the human spirit. I think the analogy in our own time is the metaphysical oppression and the oppression of the human spirit, resulting not just from slavery. You know, there are 27 million slaves in the world, so I want to be an abolition president as Lincoln was ultimately. But also we all suffer under the metaphysical oppression of secrecy. So if I was to look back at the end of one term in office that would begin either in 2017 or 2021 or 2025, whenever it begins, I want to be responsible for bringing about the end to the untoward application of official state secrecy. I mean, official slavery of human beings was the law of the land, at least in the South, and people were owned as property. What we're all suffering under is the oppression of secrecy and an understanding by those in government that somehow they were hired to maintain secrecy from the people when in fact we never gave them that power. And so that's the historical moment that we find ourselves in politically. Look at the fractured dialogue, the fractured public discourse that goes on in all areas of human life now. When you have cancer cures that are held back by government, we can't discuss the dread disease of cancer knowledgeably in the mainstream and alternative media. When there's astronomical threats, astronomical threats like whether there's a Planet X approaching and the government is keeping back what it knows about celestial threats to our planet, as long as secrecy persists, again, the public discourse, even among the cognoscentes, the well-informed people regarding that issue, is fractured and incomplete and unnecessarily fractious because of secrecy. There's been the suppression of life-advantaging medical and transportation technologies. So really, what we're all living under and being oppressed by, for those of us lucky enough to not be counted among those 27 million human beings who are in physical bondage in the world today and who need to be liberated, I'm proposing that we buy the freedom of those people, which I think we could do. We could do for less money than we spend on a typical missile project. We all live under the oppression of state secrecy, a negative legacy of the Cold War that now has to be reconsidered. What I'm advancing is the public policy alternative, that the only justifiable use of official state secrecy is where there's a clear and present danger to society if the information was released, and that would be the USA v. Irwin Knoll, the progressive lawsuit injunction regarding the progressive publishing how to build an atomic bomb. And then also we would want to permit government secrecy where the public revelation of the information would compromise individual or group privacy in a way that would oppress the rights of those who would be subject to the revelation. For example, private, relatively meaningless but embarrassing or compromising or sensitive information gathered, for example, when the FBI investigates criminal activity and innocent people are investigated. Or they're investigated potentially as being involved in crime and then found out to be innocent. Those are, in my view, the only two legitimate areas for official state secrecy, and yet we're living in this paradoxical, ironic, dysfunctional, backwards America where we even have the President of the United States ridiculing his colleagues from a secret space program that he was involved in 35 years ago. I mean, we have to get beyond the complex of state secrecy and the way it has made participants in the political process and elected and official governments of the United States think. We have a lot of technology transfer of both benign and malign technology, both benevolent and malevolent technology already. In fact, to some extent, the United States and the former Soviet Union were essentially buying each other's secrets to keep abreast of each other during the Cold War in terms of our nuclear preparedness. So we have to really examine what official state secrecy has done to our political culture. To the extent that it's prevented us from implementing Tesla teleportation since 1970, that is 45 years after it could have been implemented, it has definitely retarded our civilization. It has kept our civilization back in an untoward way. And so we have to examine how we create a public policy discourse to end most of the secrecy that's gone on. If, for example, more people should be living at higher ground rather than having 70% of humanity live within a 1-hour car drive of an ocean, then people have the right to be told that maybe they should move from San Diego to Denver. If in fact there's a high probability that we're going to have a global coastal flooding event. They have a right to survive and to protect their families. That's just one of thousands of examples where official state secrecy has prevented people from learning about the world we inhabit. The fact that there's a human presence on Mars, both indigenous and from our own civilization. The fact that we're living in the second civilization on Earth after the first one was destroyed. The fact that the government has known since the early 70s that extraterrestrials have been visiting our planet for thousands of years, have been abducting people for several hundred years, that the people who are abducted can expect to be abducted and contacted throughout their life cycle, and that specific people are being contacted, and that most of them are endowed with a higher level of creativity as a result of their ET contact experiences. And yet by 1970 the government didn't know where most of these ETs were from, who they were, or what they wanted in contacting our civilization. There's even a possibility that they weren't extraterrestrial, but they were interterrestrials from within the mantle of the Earth itself, traveling to the surface via volcanic vents and so forth, and volcanoes. So this is my mission. I'm running for president for a particular reason. And so as a student of American history, when I look back on that epochal struggle to save the Union and to end slavery, that was the Civil War era under the leadership of Abraham Lincoln, a great lawyer at that, I'm analogizing to the present era, and that's the great battle that we now have to fight within the United States, is the battle to know the truth and tell it, because that is the first obligation of a president, and that's what I hope to implement as president.
All right. Well, Andrew, thank you very much. I appreciate you being a guest here tonight. It's been a while, and I thank you for being back on. We shouldn't make it so long. I'd love to have you back in the near future.
I'll see you in the near future too, Mr. President. That was my mission. I'll let you know.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you for your courageous disclosure, and it really corresponds to what many other people who have had psychic experiences or government time travel or ET contact. I've probably been contacted by at least 100 people who said, thank you for showing up. I was waiting for you.
I'm waiting for my dignity when that time arrives.
All right, Ben, anything you want to throw out there?
That's it.
All right. Well, guys, thank you very much. We are out of time here. We're actually over time. So thank you very much, and until next time, keep up the great work.